We are live.
Hi, we're live. Hello, world. Like
Hello,
the
world.
WordPress thing.
It's not just a WordPress thing. It's like I'm teaching myself Python, and the thing is print hello world. That thing you did when you didn't learn
I don't
basic.
even remember you telling me you were teaching yourself Python. When are you doing that? This is like I love it, your summer activities.
Yeah.
So just to confirm that any one of your pupils, if ever they come across this, they're like, oh my God, he's such a geek. He's like, nobody doesn't go to the beach,
Yes.
doesn't go on holidays.
So proud of.
And I mean, that actually, I'm a geek, but I do go on holidays. Not that you don't, you do as well. But
exactly. But hang on a second. I swear I told you I'd teach myself Python.
you probably haven't. It's entirely possible. I forgot.
Because I want to do a master's in data analytics. So I found a little thing that teaches me Python, and it reminds me of learning basic when I did basic when I was about
I remember now. Yeah, I remember
12.
Yeah.
Hello world. Print hello world. It's that kind of atmosphere. So, okay, reading. You read. Have you finished No Logo now?
No, I started another novel in between because it was getting. I have what?
Can't have much left.
No, like 50 pages. Yeah, 58 pages left.
And then, so I read that.
I kind of stopped. I was reading it, and then I started another novel because it was again getting like, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I read it like 20 years ago when it came out, and it blew my mind 20 years ago. I haven't read it.
Oh, good. It's blowing my mind. It's still blowing my mind.
And it's massively relevant to what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about this for anybody who's not familiar. No Logo. People are asking me, like, what is this thing? I'm like, it's very difficult to describe. There's so much going on. Aside from it's a book written by a journalist, published in 2002, so technically a little old in age, but I think the principles and the ideas are still extremely relevant for the most part. There's a lot of things I'd like to go and dig in to find out a bit more how it's evolved, but pretty much have the sense that it's going in that same direction. Really looking at the I was going to say the synergy and or effects and or consequences or relationship between branding and logos and marketing and the way that it's been developed over the past 25 years or 30 years with neoliberal, unabashed, unbridled capitalism. There you go.
Yeah, free market.
Unbridled.
Profit motive.
Not just free market, those are like just, I mean so there's another book that she quotes on neoliberalism that was written in that talks about how things changed since the 80s. There's more than one book that talks about how things started changing from a policy perspective and an overview perspective and globalization perspective. That takes a whole big, much exponential step compared to what free market and free enterprise was in a capitalistic way before the 80s.
The 80s, the big thing that I understand from the 80s is the deregulation of financial markets, deregulation of everything, pretty much.
So, but that's not the main topic of this particular book.
That...
This particular book really takes it at the beginning of a brand crisis that apparently happened. There's an extra chapter to go because this edition is from 2012, so there's 10 years on. And we're another 10 years on, which is super interesting. What's very interesting is, for the most part, is very well researched. It's clearly critical of unbridled capitalism, but it is also very researched and giving other perspectives of who's for and against, and or whoever's against and is kind of like dreamily thinking that there might have been some kind of better world in the past of untouched culture or culture untouched by brands. And she's like, well, also saying that, making clear that didn't exist. In general, culture was always usually promoted by the rich and powerful. Paintings and artists.
That's a really great point.
Yeah, so this
about
is from the
culture
beginning of the book.
And business invading our spaces of culture. So there's no line between exploring who we are and making money.
Yeah, but she doesn't even go there. This point is about how artistic integrity and culture is going to be completely dominated by brands. But she also mentions a couple of people who were saying, well, how there used to be a time where it was untouched, and she's like, that did not exist. even just to take a very simple example, for a long time, the church, let's say in Western worlds, sponsored and said what kind of art was okay. So that's like really profoundly impacted culture.
Yep.
And so they dominated the culture. It wasn't just there was some free thing. And the rich and the kings, the nobles, they had the money to patronize artists. And so the ones they liked, they already had there was always an influence by a powerful force of a very few people over the rest of culture. And also there was, the mass at that particular point, all everybody was peasants. They didn't really have access to culture anyway. I mean, that was the culture. The culture was you go and take care of your fields and go back home and eat and go to bed and do it again the following morning. Anyway, so this is a lot about Nike, so it's all my job, but it runs the gamut. It's called No Logo, and there's 4 big parts to the book. And it goes, and so of course so the first part is called No Space, and how the brand expands, alternative anything, the branding of schools and academia, identity marketing, brand bombing, mergers, synergy of like different brands working together. So that a Target is going to open a Starbucks inside of their thing, so they have a different kind of image than a Walmart that has a cheap Walmart coffee, for example. She didn't talk about that one, but that's one. So the first part's No Space, then No Choice, because the bigger brands make it that there's no other alternatives.
It's all the same.
Just like take the big thing. No Jobs, all the jobs have moved. Companies are opening and going to the cheapest kind of things. She goes to the Philippines, to Sri Lanka, to Indonesia, visits the people that are the kids and disenfranchised people in the what's called the free export zones, that are special areas where all the big brand stuff is manufactured. So, and you have this kind of spiral of, for example, she talks about Nike quite a lot, but it's not the only one. It's a good example. Taking from the culture of the streets of mostly, youth, disenfranchised or just poor or popular area, as in youth of America or other big markets, to sell it to the richer kids, and then closes the factory. So the parents of these kids in the areas where there's not that many jobs don't have their jobs at all. Take it to, goes through various outsourcing devices, companies, one company hiring another company, very stringent kind of things. And she goes and does that in the 90s. So certainly some of the conditions have changed, but it's really not that long ago that clothing manufacturing factory in Bangladesh just collapsed on itself, and hundreds of people died, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to go back and look at that one, because she details stuff that happened in the 1910s in New York, at the time where recent immigration waves of Italian and Portuguese were working for no money and had to throw themselves out the window of a clothes manufacturing thing. And then talks about another one that happened in Thailand, same thing exactly, but in 1990, can't remember, early 90s.
And then now you got the Chinese ones.
All right, maybe some things, but I don't know. We know that the Chinese created this kind of zones, and basically not much short of enslaved the Uyghur, but already a lot of other populations were enslaved. And so she details exactly how it happens, what's happening, which is just like a lot to stomach. It was 20 years ago, but there's still a lot of people that are massively exploited. And she's not just finger pointing. She's literally just talking to people, finding out what different movements are doing, what are they doing what's actually going in the heads of people, how these brands are preventing people from unionizing, for example.
Well, that's the other big thing in the 80s, especially in the UK, the destruction of the power of the union.
And then the last part is called No Logo. And there's different kinds of stories of how things are moving in the right or wrong direction. Starting with, the brands have put so much weight and so much meaning and so much communication behind the value of their brand to grow the value of the whole business. But in terms of pure meaning, that they detach the meaning of Nike as the spirit of sports, detached from the shoes, detached from the factories, detached from everything they're doing. But then the other detractors have used it against them, because to say, if you draw them up on a pedestal, people like, Greenpeace or others have used the same means of communication because if you start putting so much, and that's happening still a lot now, put so much power into the brand that a lot of people will take it more personally if they learn that the brand is doing something they consider to be bad. On another hand, it's always also gone full circle because the brand has been able to, for example, Nike with the Colin Kaepernick campaign, been able to go way further into being seen as a paragon of virtue and forward thinking and Black Lives Matter and etc. And at the same time, a lot of brands had a lot of concerns, and they still do right now around the war in Ukraine. There was a big question. So it's raising a lot of different questions, and it's pretty intense, but it's a very good book. I'm very happy to finally read it. I guess maybe I wasn't ready until now, but I'm recommending it to a lot of my students. People have told me that her second book, The Shock Doctrine, is even not rougher, but like more interesting. I've not read it. I'd like to read it. I'm probably going to read something else in between. Like I'm probably going to read something like this, Free to Learn about play.
I love that book.
That might be a little bit more uplifting.
Maybe
not. Oh, okay.
I think it will be more uplifting, but I read No Logo.
It's not that this is not. I think this is encouraged me to go and research to find out what's going on 20 years later, but without knowing exactly the state of factories producing Nike shoes or whatever. I do know that the Oxfam inequality report is stating the last 2 years more inequalities than ever. And I do know that there's still a lot of factories in different parts of the world where people are completely exploited. That's for sure. Now, in what way, shape, or form, is it better than before? Not sure yet.
Until I read that book, I never really considered it. And it's that was one of the first books I read, which made me realize how interdependent everything is. And COVID really highlighted like one tiny little thing, and it has a dramatic effect on loads.
And again, so that's what really is interesting, and I think rigorous in the journalistic work of this, is that she does cover a lot of ground and she sources everything. And it's not about finger pointing that this is bad. It's about showing how everything's interconnected. You draw your own conclusions, but also how it's not, there's no easy solution to this particular thing. Just like when she talks, and that was at the beginning of the book, when she talks about culture, her perspective, where she said, because she's also quite personal, she talks about her life, and her perspective is that there should be some fight and some push and pull between the forces of power and market and business and culture. And that, sure, it's fair that there is some push and pull, but now there isn't really much. It's just corporate culture and everything that has englobed everything that is super strong. And in what ways is difficult to fathom when you're in the middle of it.
No Logo really made me think about, I think I should probably not Logo, sorry. I should probably recommend The Shock Doctrine to more of my economics students, because it's
big time.
So good because she's not an economist, but she's a journalist. She's articulating a lot of things. Like she came up with the phrase "disaster capitalism." I'm pretty sure.
I think so, yeah.
And it's horrible. It's horrible. So, but Free to Learn is uplifting and depressing at the same time. Probably more uplifting.
About the state of schools, academia, and the way it's organized. Okay. Which she does talk about. With the part about branding in schools is already quite heavy. But it's good. It's not heavy. It's actually, I don't want to overdo the heavy and intense thing, because then it's going to discourage people from reading it. I think it's important.
It's accessible.
Now, some people, I talked about it, they were like, I live in denial, don't want to read that kind of book. She's like, all right, fair. Or at least for now. And so I don't want to read about the horrible things in the world. I kind of know they're out there. But it's also, it's a very, it's not as well, it's very well written. You can easily read it. It's not as, even Bullshit Jobs has so much ideas. It's not as witty as Bullshit Jobs, because it's still written more like a journalist. There's a lot more, whereas Bullshit Jobs that you're reading is funnier at times. I did smile and laugh, whereas in this one I'm like, wow, this is super interesting, but I'm not smiling or laughing, even though it's heavy. Not heavy, but
before we talk about Bullshit Jobs a bit, there's an image in No Logo that stayed with me of, I think it's an urban landscape without any brands. Is that in that book? It is. I'm pretty sure it is.
I don't think so. Isn't that in Brazil where they did that?
I don't know where she did it, but or Cuba or something.
Brazil is a place where they
but it
stopped
was
doing
it was
billboards
a it was a
on Sao
picture.
Paulo.
No, it was a picture of an urban landscape where they took out all the brands, and it looked so weird.
I don't remember seeing that in the book.
I thought, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure. I
Maybe
thought
it
that
is,
was,
but
yeah. So that I remember reading that book. I kind of want to reread it after listening to you now. But then you also read Bullshit Jobs, and you would not stop raving about this book.
yeah.
Now I started reading it. I'm about a quarter of the way through, and I cannot go for a walk anywhere without thinking about this book.
Right.
And he's not a journalist, is he? He's an professor of anthropology, isn't he? Oh my gosh, this guy. And
he got seriously interested in economy because he read like a history of debt that is massive. So he's very cross-disciplinary as well.
Yeah, he's really cool. Really, his writing, it's funny.
He's an amazing writer, I think.
But the thing I liked about it is that it's very right. Naomi Klein's No Logo is very well referenced and all that kind of. It's journalistic. His is much more qualitative, research based.
Yeah, in this particular book, I think I wouldn't be surprised if the history of debt, which is very big, is a lot more other types of sources, whereas this one is openly qualitative.
It's really, and it's so well done. I can the way he collected everyone's case studies and uses them to make his point is so good.
And to create these typologies and categorizations, and it's really good.
But I can't see anything now except through the lens of that book now. Like, what is so? You know, my wife works as an executive assistant, and I'm now thinking, box ticker, no. Goon, no. All of these.
Do you want to explain that, perhaps?
So
for the sake of our barely existing audience, but our pretend audience.
I'm gonna mangle it, but he basically says there are different kinds.
Well, first, what's a bullshit job? Because the whole part about definitions.
Yeah, and he does a good job of going through his thought process. So I think he basically says a bullshit job is a job where the person working in it knows that they're not providing any value.
It's completely pointless. It's self-reported by the person doing the job. It's not a judgment value. Yeah,
and if they stopped doing their job, it wouldn't make any difference to anything. It's just either nobody would notice. And when I first heard that,
and part of the contract is that you probably don't want to say that unless you might lose your job and you might need it. So
like he really articulates that kind of the great unsaid, the social contract. Like you never say that you think your job is pointless because the whole house of cards will come crashing down.
Yeah, he circles back to that whole idea, in further detail.
Oh, does he? Okay, yeah. So that's a bullshit job. And then of course I'm thinking, is my job as a teacher a bullshit job? Is it? Could it be?
He also goes into more stuff where you can see it as a spectrum of like what happens at certain times, where it's not just a clear cut thing. You realize as you're reading that you're like, wait a minute, this is not just a clear cut thing.
Oh, okay.
And in your case, you'll certainly recognize, because he talks about his situation in academia, so he talks about school stuff that will probably be meaningful to you. But even to me, it made sense because it was just, adding layers of admin to something.
There's a very funny bit about strategy and values or something. And anyone who has strategic in their job or to evaluate the strategy of something, it's likely to be rubbish. And
that's my title. So you can imagine that most of what I do is complete bullshit.
Well, part of this, just before I started reading it, the school's out now, but part of what I'm going to be doing is reviewing the school's strategic plan so I can give feedback on it. And all I'm thinking of, this is just this. What is the point in this?
Well, to do what you were asked, do your job, organize a meeting and talk it out with other people. To then amend the strategic plan so that it's better, I guess.
So I've sent that quote. I sent it to one of my colleagues, and I very nearly sent it to my deputy head. And I thought, can I do this?
Is it really worth it? It might be misinterpreted.
She might. She wouldn't in conversation because I get on so well with her.
Probably better. But I don't know what the relationship is, what the quote is specifically.
Yeah, it's the it's a quote about strategic, and I just like okay, but so he defines bullshit jobs that way, and then he goes on to categorize them, the different
Yeah,
kinds of bullshit job.
I love the categorization.
Oh my god, I can't remember them all, but goons,
Yes.
box tickers.
Yes.
What else was there?
Flunkies.
Oh yeah, flunkies. Oh god. Then there was
And the
there...
taskmasters. Is it taskmasters? The people who do management. So if you're in middle management, then you're supposed to create stuff for people to do, even if there's nothing to do.
But and then they overlap too. Are taskmasters the worst because they're the ones that create bullshit even more for the people below them? Something like that. Honestly, this book is very, very accessible, and it's very thought-provoking, and kind of scary.
And fortunately, written with a lot of humor and wit,
yeah, it is,
and really funny. And for only a quarter, it only gets better from there. It goes further in all his thinking. It's really, I loved it. I need to read his other books.
Yeah, and then I saw an advert on the tube for one of his books. The same guy.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't remember what it was called. It was written with someone else in this big red and yellow like poster. And I was like, that's the same guy that wrote Bullshit Jobs. So it's, I don't know, it just, things show up. Now, the other thought I had was, as I was reading this, I'm thinking, Willem's PhD should be like this, could be like this. It really could. You could so do something. I'm not saying it's going to be exactly the same as Bullshit Jobs, but you could do something that lifts the lid or exposes or brings a new way of thinking to something.
That's kind of what I really like about the idea to keep studying.
Yeah.
And to write stuff that is peer reviewed and deal with that experience, because apparently it's quite difficult and eye-opening and all that.
Because maybe the thing to do is write some actual journal articles. Because have you been certified?
Huh?
Certified?
What do you mean?
Master? Your masters? Is it?
Yeah, I have my master's.
So what are you? Willem van der Hurst, doctor? No, not doctor.
No, I'm not.
BA. What are the letters?
No, this is an MA. Well, technically,
so BA, MA.
I don't even know what.
What would the letters after your name be?
Right now?
Yeah.
I don't have letters after my name when I have a master's. Are you kidding?
Yeah, you do, don't you?
No, that's for the PhD.
People put that. Maybe it's a teaching thing then.
This way, I mean, I know.
Is that all super pretentious?
For a master's, a lot of people have it. I mean, PhD, okay, and it's still a lot.
It must be a teaching thing because on our website they have a list of all the teachers, and they put after their name like BSc.
I mean, nobody's ever. I mean, I've never seen this on LinkedIn. You have it listed under, but not in your title. I mean, I guess you could. Wouldn't it be weird?
It probably would be weird. I think it'd be weird on LinkedIn. But I remember looking on my school website, looking at all the degrees that people have. Like, is it a BSc, ONS, BA ONS, MA, MPhil? There's a couple of MPhils.
What's MPhil?
So an MPhil is rather than the doctorate. If a doctorate's here and a master's is here, an MPhil is kind of in between. I think it's Masters of Philosophy rather than a doctorate of philosophy. Okay. Something like that. So, yeah. Oh, okay. So you've got the masters. If you were going to write a journal article, which journal?
Oh, I don't even know. I have no idea. The first thing I would, and I haven't had time to look at it, and summer's going by really fast, is to spend more time thinking about what I would want my topic of study to be, and looking for a teacher.
Is there even a journal of marketing? There must be, right?
Yeah, there's more than one.
Oh, is there? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
Yeah, of course.
I don't actually know.
Yeah, no, I barely know, but I can't quote what the names. I don't know. I know that they exist.
Yeah, okay. But
and I'm also curious what I would have to go and study. Would I have to go study another discipline? But maybe not. Maybe I could just like state it. A friend told me that I should probably, in any case, approach whoever I think it could be a good. I I don't know what it's called, a tutor or a PhD
Supervisor. There
supervisor. I'm not
is
sure.
that.
The
Yeah, yeah,
teacher,
yeah, yeah.
anyway.
I know what you
Professor, I
mean.
mean, the
Yeah, yeah, I know.
professor, reference. The person that says, yes, I will take you under my wing. But sort of like not to take them under the wing. He was like, if you show up and they're afraid of you wanting to go towards a professorship track in a university, and there's so much competition for that, and they probably already have their young guns that they want to have up for that track. However, if you show up saying, listen, I'm a professional, I'm a consultant, I'm interested in pursuing my studies of a multidisciplinary field because I want to expand knowledge in this area, and I think it matches with what you're doing, then they'd probably be a lot more interested in having just working with somebody who's not a threat to their internal politics of the university, or doesn't seem like one anyway. Now, but that said, I need to think more about what I would write about, what I would study, the field, narrow it down, because that's usually what writing a thesis is, narrowing it down, which we briefly talked about, but I'm still at the same point because I haven't had time I didn't write anything in the past week, aside from my journal and just work stuff. And looking for a teacher, finding the journals, reading journal articles, locating and contacting possible professors, reading some more things so that I have a sense of what I'm diving into, finding out if I would be, accepted, how it would work. But the first thing, apparently, according to the advice that I read online, because that was already a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago almost, is really to, that was 2 weeks ago, sorry.
Pick your area.
To pick an area. Well, pick a topic. Ideally narrow. Most of the theses are narrow.
Yeah.
The broader your field is, the more difficult and the longer it's going to take to study. And find a professor and go to them and say, this is who I am, this is my topic I want to study. And basically, those are the two things you got to find. You got to find a referring professor and have a topic. So the topic might change in discussing with a professor, and also I started looking at one website of a university, and professors in information communication have their specialties, and usually it's listed in their page, the profile page, what kind of things they're specialized in from their thesis, or which gives you an idea. Like, I vaguely remember looking at one just briefly that said that they were studying and researching, because they're doing research, right? The phenomenon of spreading information between communities on social media, or something like that.
Okay.
So it was a little bit more specific than what I said, but it was around the idea of how does information spread between people amongst different groups within a certain social media or another.
Wow.
And so anyway, that's, is that a good person to contact? And I have notions that I would want to do something around, I'm not sure what, play and branding, play and marketing, something that fits within my general interests. I also had another idea saying, okay, well, if I do manage to narrow it down and find a topic and get into studying it, because I was also wondering over the summer, I would like to wonder over the summer, because I haven't really spent time looking at what I'm doing with my website, my podcast, my newsletter, if anything. And then I thought, actually, if I do have a topic and I am studying for a thesis, then perhaps interviewing people for my podcast can become, that's the goal. I'm not just randomly interviewing people. I'm choosing the guests based on the studies, and I'm talking to them because it's going to further my study of my topic.
Oh, that's cool. So
that could be and it's still, it in effect doesn't really change what I'm doing. I'm having interviews with people and sharing them. But the context is, this is in the pursuit of my research. Maybe it's an idea.
That's a really interesting idea, because then you've got a unifying kind of idea between everything you're doing, but you're documenting it as you go, which helps the research process. Oh, that's
what's going to be really difficult is narrowing down what it is I'm studying and making it a topic that will be interesting to the world at large at the moment, not just something super weird that I'm just interested in studying. Or maybe it could be, but then maybe the professor might go, okay, you need to pick something that's a little bit more of concern. I don't know, maybe not. And how do I narrow it down? And that's going to be difficult. Also, knowing that I have so many different ideas and I want to study everything, and I have a hard time pinning down one thing.
Yeah,
So,
true.
but I'll, I don't know. I'll see. I'd spend a bit more time on it. And ideally, it would be good for me to figure it out over the next month so that I can put candidates, like they're opening up, they close applications at the end of August, early September.
That's when they close them. Oh, wow.
While they're
Okay, so
opening them for the following academic year.
Okay.
Now, but I don't know what the process is really, and now if it goes another year, but I have the professor, I have the topic, then I can do my research, even if I'm not officially into the university, I guess. I don't know. It seems like it's mostly happening in English, so I would have to make sure that's the case. Even if I go to a French university, apparently you start going into PhD territory, everybody's writing in English because it's international.
Okay.
Is what I hear. Or
okay.
I've heard somebody tell me that they insisted and wrote theirs in French, then realized that they couldn't get peer reviewed in the things in the journals they wanted, and they had to rewrite everything in English.
Wow. So do you know people who have done or are doing a PhD?
Yes.
Who are friends of yours?
So I have talked to one friend of mine who is a professor of law at Bordeaux University, and so she did her thesis. It took her a long time. She strongly advised against it.
Oh yeah, you did mention this. Yeah.
So I have that chime going. Do not do that. That is completely usshe's.
Yeah, and then
you're going to go into a world of pain. It's going to bring you nothing. Why would you want to do this exactly? And she's like, in France, maybe in the States or an Anglo-Saxon kind of environment, for a professional, it might have a beneficial reputation aspect or perhaps business aspect to have a PhD. Mm-hmm. But she said in France, businesses don't like that at all because they just have the immediate impression you're going to be some airy-fairy professor, not have your feet on the ground and really be useful to their business, which is not how I think anyway. So I don't, and I honestly, there's a lot of French businesses for whom I could never work anyway. So it doesn't really change anything to my situation, I don't think. So for example, I was reading I'm grading fifth year student papers at the moment who are telling me about their year of work study program, right? And one of them works for a very large international French company that is very famous. And also, private, family owned, traditional.
Okay.
And explaining to me, and I told my brother this, who just arrived in Paris, and I hadn't seen him for 3 years. It was really great to see him. And he was like, "Oh yeah, my company in Sri Lanka was the same when I was working there, very traditional." So to illustrate, the student would say, to illustrate what she meant by saying very traditional, and my brother was the same apparently in his previous company in Sri Lanka. When you write an email, maybe it's the same at yours, but I've never worked for a company that has this, like the rigor of when you write an email.
Mm-hmm.
The order of the people you write the email to, if there's more than one, has to be hierarchical. And it's very important.
Wow. Sometimes.
And this is just one tiny example of how, there's all sorts of rigorous, very traditional rules of how you communicate. And
wow. Okay. Sometimes I'll deliberately put everybody in alphabetical order just to make sure that.
Yeah, and if you did this, person would get. Because as a trainee, imagine you're a trainee, you're in a work study program.
Yeah.
Going, okay, I noticed you went in alphabetical order. Interesting idea. That's not how we work. And I'm being a nice manager, I guess. I don't know.
God, what a nightmare.
You would have had extensive training before you're allowed to send an email anyway.
Extensive training before I'm allowed to send an email.
Yeah, wow. On how you write it, how you need to proofread it, how you check it, what order you're sending the people in, what the right formula of expressing yourself is, etc.
Oh my God.
So I was like, yeah, I would probably not fit in there.
Although having said that, email is a massive time sink. Just nightmare.
Yeah, and guess what do you think about right now? Because I just thought about it. Bullshit jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
This is part of the bullshitization of jobs.
Yeah.
And you can imagine some taskmaster one day or the boss has said, okay, this is the right way to do this email thing. We're going to have training sessions on the hierarchization. I don't know.
On the correct way to use emails. Some those the real life examples he has in that book of bullshit jobs are unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And well, actually,
he does admit, and I don't know if you've probably not got to this point, but he says it several times and in more eloquent fashion later in the book, that it's qualitative in nature, so it doesn't show anything, and of course skewed in a certain direction, because obviously the people who are the vast majority of the people sending him messages are the people who follow him. So it's likely that they're in tune with his kind of ideology, why he's famous for his political position, his participation in the Occupy Wall Street movement, his ideas about anarchy or capitalism. So he's like, so, just let's bear in mind, this is not it's not a scientific, but that said, it's very interesting.
Well, the case studies, the quotes he has, people are really, really honest.
Yeah,
they're really honest, and you can really see it. It does.
It is, but it's not just from me doing market research, and it's going to be even more the case if ever I get into scientific study. Yeah, it's not quantitative, so it's not.
No, it's not.
And the portion of the population that is answering, however detailed it is skewed in one direction, which is towards his worldview.
Not to say that qualitative research isn't useful.
It doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
It's not a representative sample of the population. But he also turns that into something else that he can add and new ideas about the book, which make it even greater. And the same idea that if the definition is self-reported regardless, and if you're in a position that we're never going to know if you have a bullshit job or not, because you're earning way too much money and you're happy with the system, so you're not going to report it. So it doesn't really matter to our research in the immediate right now anyway.
Yeah. And it is. It's everywhere now.
He talks about some of his suspicions around that category of people, but he's like, these are my suspicions. Now, of course, I'm happy to believe. Oh, I just saw this morning an article that I have not had time to read, which is one of the interesting ones in that the title seemed, wait, what is it? Current Affairs on the 6th of July.
Yeah.
Published an article called The Dangerous Populist Science of Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, I read that.
Oh,
that
yeah.
one.
How was that?
It's really good. One of my friends, who's actually French.
What's funny is that the subtitle, they say it's sensationalist, but then the article itself seems to be exactly sensationalist too, but I don't know.
It was, I was going to...
I think the French are really, really happy to bash on him very quickly. But then also, anybody so famous and iconic would be bashed. It's normal.
Yeah.
But I don't know. So it's worth reading. It's a good article.
I think it's worth reading because it presents an alternative to his view.
Yeah, no, which I think is great. I usually like to look at alternatives.
Because you're...
Because I like him, so I also don't want to put him too much on a pedestal either.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I felt. And it's funny you should mention this because I was going to bring it up. But it was actually a friend of mine who's French who posted it on Facebook. And his degree, or he's into archaeology. I think he might have a PhD. I don't know if he has a PhD. But he's his archaeology and South American civilizations or something like that. And he's super into that whole like Mayan, like he knows all about those, everything. And he posted that article. And what you were saying about the way Naomi Klein put her book together, very well researched, referenced really well. One of the things they say about his stuff is it's not.
And I don't know. I'm also curious whether, I'm sure Naomi Klein has her people who don't like her.
Yeah, detractors.
I have detractors. I have no idea if there was a lot of denouncing that her stuff was like sources were incorrect. I don't think so, but I don't know.
I don't think so.
But here it's saying there's a bunch of people, I know I'll have to read the article, that say that his stuff wasn't really researched.
Yep.
Maybe just adapting whatever he believed.
Yep. Yeah. So it is interesting.
Or not thoroughly, or not peer-reviewed enough.
Yeah,
I started through Google served me another article that was published in India, but immediately referred to this article of another. I don't know. It's called the Print India.
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because you said Google.
News.
Google served me another article.
Yeah, it's just like,
It's
because that's
true.
what Google says, here's the news. And I usually find these days a lot of it is really like really bad links, not interesting, a lot of like tabloid stuff that I'm like,
Yeah,
what, why are you
yeah,
giving me this stuff? But
yeah,
then
I
the
get
only
that.
options is I can say I'm not interested in this, then he's left to try to wonder what I'm doing, or remove the publication entirely, which for some is not difficult, but I also don't like to remove, because sometimes I like to see titles of things that I would never read, but I'm like, oh, this is the crazy or extreme right perspective, because he just
Mm.
served me that. So sometimes it's interesting to look at.
It's so that article I thought was very interesting, and
Yeah.
I liked the way it was put together. But
Cool.
it does present, because in episodes of
Oh, yeah, the question in the article I
Teaching
read
Tangents
that
is like,
started it, which was, is he a hack or is he a really real,
yeah,
university professor?
yeah,
I said the word hack. There was another word. I can't remember.
yeah, yeah, because we in our episodes we did talk about his ideas a lot, and
Mhm.
they're very appealing, and they do. Sometimes I think he's chasing fame a little. Like he seems
I
to
mean, he
pop
is
up
all over the
everywhere.
place.
He's all over the shop, and that doesn't happen without some kind of willingness to push yourself. And I think is it if it's the same article, and I'm pretty sure it's because it's current affairs. He the guy draws a comparison between him and Jordan Peterson. I think that kind of
It,
populist
it would be
science.
it would be fair, I think, because they're coming under the limelight with the same kind of thing. Or Sam Harris, but obviously, like, Harari is a lot more famous, but they're both university professors with Peterson.
Yeah,
I
Peterson's got
obviously prefer the ideas of Harari, I think,
yeah,
anyway. But he
clinical
also is interesting. I had
work.
a friend come over, said she hated him, and I was like, "Oh, really? Why do you hate him?" And then and she said, "Oh, he's saying we're all going to become robots." So I'm like, "What?" And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Well, did you ever read any of his books? No. Did you ever
Oh,
watch any of his TED Talks? No. How about his interviews? He's got tons online. Have you seen anything? No. It's like, okay, the problem is you don't know what he's saying. That's already a problem, which is
yeah,
a problem in most people's cases.
yeah,
The vast majority of everybody, and that's what I was telling my brother yesterday. On one hand, and she was reactivated, emotional, very clearly, like, this is against my who I am, my values, my opinions, etc. And I'm like, but you're, and then because I guess she, has some esteem for me, was listening to me sum up the ideas. I said, well, you might not like it or disagree or think it's not well researched, but you don't know what he's actually saying. And he's not saying we're all going to become robots or we should. He's just saying this is like the likely thing that I see happening based on what I've studied and based on what I see, which is clearly, some kind of prediction. He's also saying this is not the way things could go,
yeah. He's not. He
necessarily.
wasn't the.
Anyway, and I talked briefly, synthesizes the ideas. We've talked about it a bunch. And just to finish, it's just everybody's functioning like this. And what I noted also for myself is the more I read, the more I study, and it's probably going to happen even more if I do, keep studying. But regardless, even if I don't do a PhD, I'm going to keep reading or keep talking,
Yeah,
etc. The more I ask questions, the more I do that with kind of humility and wanting to find out, the less answers I really have, and the more difficult it is to have a
yeah,
very firm position on anything.
yep,
And
yep,
that's like that kind of dichotomy that is studied between knowledge and power, and to be able to say, this is like how things are, but you're always having to simplify things in a complex world.
yep. Yeah,
Uh,
and I think that's the people read something that someone has written about what someone said
yeah, and
rather
there's
than
massive
what
shortcuts.
someone said.
So, for example, and there's millions of people that watch this. So, I don't know if you heard that my brother was in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is under a lot of problems right now.
Yeah,
And so on last Saturday, not this one, the one before, the people stormed the presidential palace. The president left. Then on Tuesday night, and the night from Tuesday, he promised he would resign. They're out of money. It's a big problem. They don't have any more gas, no electricity, no fuel, food problems, you name it.
mm.
Um, and then fled to the Maldives. I don't know what the latest news are.
Oh wow, okay,
The president fled to the Maldives without resigning like he promised. So then the people were storming the prime minister was put into temporary power. And the people were against that because they said, well, you're part of the same crew that is completely corrupted and has been stealing everything. And you're the person that actually put the president's family in power for the last 10, 12, 15 years. I can't remember. And I was chatting with my sister-in-law, who's still over there, and a little bit concerned because she's like, it's a mess over here right now. They're fine right now. Okay. But, and I thought I'd check Twitter to see if there were, recent videos after having looked at the mainstream articles, to see if there were any live videos of what was happening to get a sense. And I saw the Tucker Carlson segment from Fox News on the Sunday.
Okay.
And that was extraordinary. I mean, Tucker Carlson is quite something.
Yeah.
And that was just 2 minutes, and it was already difficult to listen. But anyway, he's yelling, as that's his usually modus operandi. He's just yelling at things. And in this case was, well, the title was Sri Lanka beaten. This is what's expecting us because of the Green New Deal. It was like Sri Lankan revolution, Green New Deal, bad. And saying that last year, the president of Sri Lanka, they forbade chemical fertilizers. And so immediately the people went hungry. So the first fact is true. Immediately the people went hungry. Yes, but there's no relation to the second one. And they stormed the presidential palace. So this is what would happen if the crazy green people have their way. We can't just stop the chemical fertilizers. We need them. This is what they're trying to do with their Green New Deal. It's and it's, you're happy you could believe that. So I asked my brother. He's like, yeah, it's true that they forbade chemical fertilizers, but the reason why he did that, in truth, is because they didn't have any money to buy any fertilizers. So instead of actually saying anything and saying they didn't have money, and obviously that would lead to more suspicions of corruption, etc., they said, oh, let's just go green. Say we go green because they don't have any money to buy anything anyway.
Wow. The world is an interesting place.
Yeah, and Sri Lanka is like the biggest crisis they've had for a long time, and it's one of the poor countries that is going to suffer the most out of the crisis we have going on right now.
Yeah. It's hard not to get depressed.
It is. And I talked to a friend of mine yesterday that I hadn't seen in a year and a half. She's like a little our age, or a bit old, our age, more or less. Decided to go back to study for another master's in Montreal from France in sustainable development. And she said, well, the class I asked her, how was it? Were you studying, et cetera? Super interesting, apparently. But she said the class about décroissance, which is what, ungrowth? No. What's the opposite of growth? Degrowth? I don't know.
Shrinking,
perhaps. The idea
deflation.
The idea that the whole system that we built on, the capitalist system, is based on growth.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That is unsustainable.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of theories about just shrinking, but it's not shrinking. It's about it's ungrowth. Like there's a word in English, but I can't remember. It's degrowth, ungrowth. Anyway. And anyway, but she was like, that was super interesting, but it's very easy to go, okay, well,
yeah,
because everything is interconnected, just like we talked about with No Logo.
Yeah.
And it does come back to also, there's a problem of growth, which is also linked to demographics and population. The more population we have, the more stuff we need to be able to fulfill on the growth targets. And depending on how you look at them, and the more you do that, the more it has impact on earth resources, the air, etc. Anyway, and there was a lot of components to the course, so it seemed like a really interesting teacher, and that was asking questions, learning about all the different aspects of interconnectedness between growth. But she was also like,
yeah,
what do I do with this?
Wow.
And I'm always oscillating between, now I'm oscillating between the two. Well, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, take care of the people I love, and try to live, make the best, knowing that it's probably destroying some of the planet in some way, shape, or form. Leave it all and go, raise goats or make wine or do something in the countryside that seems to be tilling the land.
Yeah.
Do something with my hands, whatever, something.
Yeah.
But lost, just living in small local environments.
Yep.
which are the first places that would be assaulted in a Mad Max kind of environment. But anyway, or, and this is from the sitcom about the European Parliament that is really good, a French sitcom called Parlement. If you ever come across it, it's really good, quite funny, and that's like, okay, maybe it's a complete madhouse and very difficult, but maybe that would be the way to have really an impact. But we'd have to go in and do politics, like, for example, at European Parliament level. For example, it could be France, it could be something else. Know if you go in there knowing that it's unlikely that you'll have any kind of result. It's a total madhouse. Everything's nuts and everybody's nuts. It's extremely complex. But if you play a card right, you might be able to change and tip a tiny little bit of something for a large population of where you live, maybe. Or get completely cynical in the process, even more so than I am now. I don't know.
This might be a quite good
studying seems to be the right thing for me anyway.
Yeah. Oh, it does sound like it, and I can totally see you doing a PhD. I can totally see it.
I did talk to somebody else that I think I mentioned last week briefly, that I met, that I didn't know I met at a festival.
Yeah, you did tell me this.
A friend.
You did, yeah.
Who's another professor, completely different. He's like, oh, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
You just finish your studies. I was like, oh, I haven't seen it that way. He's like, yeah. It's the normal thing. You finish by thesis.
You do this. You do your
master's.
The next thing is
studies.
PhD.
And it's the full worst case scenario. You don't finish it. So what? You'll have studied things towards doing it, and of course you should. It's the full experience. I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's done a PhD in some specific weird part of history in the UK or something. I might pick his brain, see if he has any insights, and then throw them your way.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And I did talk to somebody else who works at the same school as I do, who did a PhD. She sent me an email with some thoughts, and we'll try to meet for coffee in September sometime.
Yeah.
So that was useful. And that's what I've got so far. I didn't have time to do anymore.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
I think what a nice place to end up might be something that I've stumbled across that I'm kind of getting into, and that's the effective altruism movement.
Oh yeah. Yes, Will McCaskill, is it?
Yes, it is. And Sam Harris talks about him.
And Sam Harris, I listened to the Sam Harris interview on my meditation app, on the Waking Up app, and it was an interesting conversation. Yeah, really interesting guy. He sounds like he's got an interesting book. He really gives. That's like all about. It's quite freaky. He gives everything away, not everything, but as much as you possibly can, and live as little as you can.
Yeah, that 80,000 hours is there's a open philanthropy, part of the effective altruism movement, and 80,000 hours is their kind of website where they give all this stuff away for free. Like I got the book to read. You get to get a free book. You do all this stuff, and there's a series of 10 podcasts that go into the whole effective altruism movement and explain it all. And they are people at the top of their game. It's like real life people who could be in the West.
Sound really interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, really that is the one, and his book, and he talks about it in the interview, opens up with that famous story of the playground pump in Africa.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the One Water, isn't it?
Yeah.
They
how actually it made so much noise, captured the imagination of celebrities, raised tons of money, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because in effect, in practicality, it sounds great from somebody on the other side of the world on Melrose Place or Santa Monica Boulevard.
Yep.
But in practicality, if you've ever heard of the water pump, that is a playground that you're supposed to, kids play, they turn it around, pumps water. It doesn't actually work because you have to plant it in places where there's water, which is not necessarily where kids live where there would be a playground. It's really difficult to turn. It takes a lot of energy. So the kids don't play on it. And then women are sent to get water because that's what they do, their job. But it's both embarrassing and backbreaking because it's too low, and there's painted in garish kids' colors. Yeah. And this is a backbreaking job because it's too low for them, so they have to stoop.
Yep.
Anyway, there's a lot of reasons they were all like, now they're mostly abandoned chunks of rusting metals.
Yeah.
And so that I can't remember what the actual definition of effective altruism is, but that's the opposite.
Yeah, and he's there. The reason I like it so much is because it takes an evidence-based approach to where could you, with your skills, have the most impact on the problems that humanity are dealing with. And
Yeah.
it's a very different way of looking at life, but makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it is true. It's a good place to leave it and to look at, because otherwise it's so easy to be just doom and gloom and
Yeah,
go, well,
it
just
is.
I'm going to go
But
to
it,
Vegas and be done, or I'm going to Vegas, Dubai, or the opposite. I'm going to the mountains to live in a commune with the hippies and never want to hear about society again. I'm just going to do my own veggies and be done.
yeah. I do think it's a good segue from where we started with no logo and bullshit jobs. There are interesting things happening where the capitalist system can be used to do interesting things in a positive way, but it takes some thinking, which is the hard part. By the
Yeah,
way, have you heard of this sneaker trainer brand called, I think it's called Veja, Veja?
not sure.
Two
What
French
do they
guys
do?
they make sneakers
I think it rings a bell, but I'm not sure.
it's got a V on the side in a completely sustainable way. Two French guys started it, and they went to Brazil and spoke to the guys getting the rubber, and they went to every stage in the process, and they pay everybody really well, and that's their philosophy. And they don't like they make the point that a lot of money is thrown into a brand, and they don't put any of their money into that. So they have a short film on their website. I think it might be something you might be interested in.
I'll have a look at it. Yeah, I'd be interested.
I'll find it
It's
and
a
send it to
little
you.
bit Hyatt Denim in the UK is a bit similar.
Who?
Hyatt. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's HIUTT. They make just denim out of a city in Wales, a town where there was a factory that used to make jeans for many, many years. And the guy realized, because he lived next door, so it's a known town, a small town, but known name. I can't remember right now off the top of my head.
Okay.
But I know the guy because he built another popular brand before. He was like around, and he still is around a lot of the advertising community. He also created the Do Lectors. They're super interesting. You heard of the Do Lectors?
No, I'm looking at Hyatt Denim as well. Wow. Oh, that's
And
cool.
Hyatt Denim, he realized that a lot of the seamstresses who have like 25 plus years of experience were unemployed in the town. She was like, well, why don't we just put that
Wow.
experience to use and create another brand? Because all this years of experience making jeans is going to waste.
Yeah.
So they're
Okay.
really good, well
Cool.
made. They're expensive. They're made with good material, presumably. I don't know all the details, but they have a lot of interesting things to say about business. And this guy, Dave Hyatt, Dave Hyatt is the founder and boss. And you should look at the Do Lectures. That's something I'd love to go to one
What's it
time.
called?
DO Lectures. That happens around there in Wales, or used to, or will happen again. Not sure.
The Do Lectures in Cardigan.
Yeah,
I bet it's
Cardigan.
Cardigan, isn't
It's
it?
Cardigan we're going to be talking about. I knew it was a known name. I was like, it's very known for some reason.
Oh, I remember hearing about the Do Lectures. Never. I don't know why.
I've seen that guy
Okay,
speak
I've
once
got it.
years ago in Google in London.
Okay, I got it. I got
And
to
their
look that up.
newsletter is super interesting. I barely have time to read it, but it's a lot of interesting stuff.
Okay, cool. That's
So
a
there's
good place
options.
to
So,
end
and
it.
the website you said is 80,000 hours. That's the one to go
Yeah,
look at.
80,000
So yeah,
hours.org. Yeah,
okay, cool, great.
it's very deep thinking, but very well done. And I'm finding it's pushing me to the edge of my thinking.
That
It's
sounds good.
it's not easy, but it's not inaccessible to me. But
Okay,
it is like, oh wow, okay, cool.
I need to look at that. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, cool man. And I think we should do some. I think our next conversation is on Sunday,
Yeah.
and we should definitely do some gaming then.